Have you been struggling with Path of Exile 2? Are you just looking for the best way to level up quickly, kill bosses, or progress fast through the starting campaign in this game? Then I have the perfect build for you. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. HTM here with possibly my favorite starting build so far in Path of Exile 2, which is the Ranger class. Now, the Ranger is insane when it comes to clearing out enemies fast, as well as easily defeating bosses with pretty much no effort. I'm talking 2 to 3 skills at most at the start of the game with just some basic support gems, blue quality gear, and you can do really well. So if you're looking for a super easy build to dominate the early game of Path of Exile 2, then this beginner Ranger setup is definitely the way to go. In this video, we'll cover everything you need to know to make it work. Timestamps are provided below if you need to skip around or rewatch a section, and there will be a link for the written guide down below as well. That said, let's jump right into it. So first, as usual, let's talk about the skills and what makes the Ranger so good as a starting class for Path of Exile 2, especially for beginners. Now, the main reason for this is your starting abilities are pretty insane when it comes to damage potential with the right gems, and you also have good options for single target damage, which is great for bosses, plus AoE, of course, which is great for clearing packs of enemies. But before we even get to the skills, let's talk about your basic attack on the Ranger called Bowshot, which is free to cast, extremely quick, and can also get super juiced up with the right gems to be a DPS machine. And what's cool about this attack as well is it automatically levels up, so you never need to use additional skill gems for it, just support gems. And like I said, look at the single target DPS, which vastly outperforms most of my other normal abilities at the start of the game. Now, what I recommend here with this skill early on is to put on a support gem that increases your attack speed, specifically the stamina gem called Martial Tempo. This is going to increase that attack speed of your bowshot by 25%, and you should notice the difference here right away. Then you can either combine this with Brutality. That's going to be useful, especially if the bow that you picked up has bonuses to physical damage as well. Or even better, I think, especially in Act 1, is the support gem called Overpower, which increases your stun buildup by 50%. So spamming this attack on bosses is a quick way to get them stun broken and avoid most of their damaging mechanics because they're just going to be stunned for the majority of the fight. So this thing with the right gems, as I said, and a good bow, which we'll talk about in a bit, is a single target killer, even more so than some of the skills that you actually unlock later on the Ranger, like Snipe, for example. So don't overlook this basic attack. It's by far your best option right at the start of POE2. But with your first gem, you'll want to start unlocking some AoE potential on this build, and that's where we get to Lightning Arrow. This skill, once it hits a target or a nearby wall or structure, actually does chain lightning beams out, so it can damage multiple enemies at once. We also have other skills that combine with this as well to increase that effect. But what's also interesting about Lightning Arrow is that the skill converts its damage from physical damage into lightning damage, but that's actually a good thing for this build early on. Most basic bows do physical damage or have additional bonuses to physical damage, and you can get more of that from runes, of course, which applies to your bow shot attack as well. We'll talk about this when we cover gear. But in terms of support gems with Lightning Arrow, good starting option here is going to be Lightning Infusion, because that's going to amp up that lightning damage to your hits after they convert from physical. So you should see a big difference there in overall damage, and then eventually you want to pick up a support gem called Conduction, which gives your lightning attacks greater chance to shock enemies. We're going to need that to proc one of our spirit gems, which we'll talk about in just a minute, for even more AoE and lightning damage. But the cool thing about Lightning Arrow is that it bounces off targets, as I said, and you can give it more targets to chain from with the next skill called Lightning Rod. This skill fires an arrow in the air that drops down, placing rods into the ground, which, when the rods are chained to by Lightning Arrow, they release another lightning burst. So more damage and more chance to shock targets, which is awesome. And now this skill is a bit weak without the right support gem, so I highly recommend you slot in the Scatter Shot gem as soon as possible to make this a 3-shot skill versus just 1 shot, and then follow that up with something like Magnitude for the extra area of effect. Again, this is just for the start of the game, and there will be better support gems you'll unlock eventually, but this is going to give you a really good start. Now, I did find another skill to be extremely useful early on in the campaign, especially against bosses, and that skill is Poisonburst Arrow. Now, this skill poisons a target on hit, dealing damage over time. with some additional chances to debuff just based on your support gems. So there are several ways to build off this skill, but I prefer using an easy way to break boss armor, and that is the Corrosion support gem. This breaks armor equal to 80% of your damage dealt, and it can stack up quite quickly, at which point the boss's armor will be fully broken for about 12 seconds, giving you a great window to increase your overall damage against them. The Bursting Plague support is another useful gem for this skill, which adds another 200% bonus damage up to 10% of an enemy's total life. So I do like to start with that one as well. Now, there are some decent bonuses to poison damage, which we'll talk about in the passive skill tree too. For example, giving you the ability to poison a target 2 times, so almost double that damage essentially, as well as increased damage and duration. So the skill, as I said, can actually be quite good in the early to mid game when you factor in these support gems as well. But really the great thing about this, and specifically for new players, I think, is this skill just does passive damage. So when you're learning a boss mechanic, or you need to move around or dodge a lot during a boss fight, if you have those poison arrows applied to the boss, you're still doing damage the entire time, and you're breaking their armor as well. So I think this skill is pretty highly overlooked, especially for the first couple of acts, and I definitely recommend you check it out. Now, another skill you want to pick up as soon as possible is called Escape Shot. This causes your ranger to leap backwards, as well as fire an arrow which can chill or hopefully freeze enemies in place. Now, this skill comes in especially handy during the first 2 acts of the game, as there are many maps which have small corridors, which you can easily freeze 2 or 3 enemies from a pack there, and you can entrap the entire group behind them so they can't actually attack you. You can then combine this with a few lightning rod and lightning arrow combos to destroy the entire group without taking a single hit yourself. So it's a really effective way to play early on in the game. Now, to improve that effectiveness even more, you'll want to pick up the intelligence support gems called Glaciation. This applies 50% more freeze buildup, so you'll get those freezes off more often. And then combine this with the deep freeze support for 50% increased freeze duration, making those frozen enemies stay put as long as possible. Remember here that these are intelligence gems, so they're going to require 5 int per gem to use, so you may need to put a few extra passive nodes into your intelligence, but I think it's definitely worth it for this skill and these extra utility gems, because it makes it so easy to shut down packs of mobs early and basically take no damage, so it's a really nice option. Speaking of getting stronger, one final early addition to this build that I recommend comes if you're able to unlock a spirit gem. Now, spirit gems look pretty much just like skill gems, so they're easy to kind of overlook, but they do give you access to special persistent buffs. And there's a great one for this build early on called Herald of Thunder, which is going to amp up your lightning setup even more. So this skill does require at least 30 spirit to use, but you can get a permanent 30 spirit buff by killing one of the side bosses in Act 1 that I'm sure most people have found at this point, so make sure you do that as soon as possible. But basically, Herald of Thunder will throw out some extra lightning bolts onto nearby enemies when you kill a shocked enemy, which again, that's why we wanted more chance to shock on the setup, as the bonus damage here can be pretty good actually. And once you get even more spirit, like on pieces of equipment, for example, you can also run support gems onto this skill, such as the Precision support gem, which you can slot in for 30% bonus accuracy, and the Vitality support gem, which gives you some bonus life per second. Again, the base skill, Herald of Thunder, should be your first priority as soon as you do get a spirit gem, and then you can add those support options if and when you get some gear, which also increases your base spirit stat. All right, so those are the basic skills. How do you then put everything together? Well, like we talked about, your basic bow shot combined with lightning arrow are going to be a very strong combination at the very start of the game. This will give you good damage from range against both normal enemies and bosses. From there, the next skill you should pick up is Lightning Rod. You're going to combine that with your Lightning Arrow, easily clear through basic enemies and packs of mobs quite quickly. And then, like I said, I also recommend you pick up that Poison Arrow burst early as well. You'll save that primarily for bosses and rare enemies to quickly break through their armor and do more damage, again with your basic shot. For bosses, you can use Lightning Arrow and Lightning Rod, that combo as well, though I do find it works better obviously if the boss is also summoning enemies, or there's multiple enemies in the fight for multiple targets for those arrows to bounce off of. So that's going to be an option as well. And then combine everything with Herald of Thunder as soon as you get that for even more lightning damage. And don't forget to pick up Escape Shot. That's going to be your best option for early mobility and also for trapping enemies, in hallways and different parts of the map to easily decimate those groups of enemies or to get off a quick freeze if you need some crowd control options. Okay, so let's talk briefly about gear and weapons and armor and what's going to work best on the Ranger as you're starting out. Well, first thing you want to pay attention to, obviously, is going to be your bow, your main source of damage. And what I recommend is you find some type of bow that has a bonus to physical damage. So you can see this one has 22% increased physical damage right off the bat. Now, this is good because it's going to increase the damage of your basic bow shot. It's also going to actually increase the damage of your lightning skills, those that convert physical damage to lightning damage. That's going to give you extra damage on those abilities as well. So physical damage, number one thing you want to look out for. Obviously, you can also increase that. You can see I have 2 slots here for runes, and I put iron runes on both. That's giving me a 40% increase to the physical damage as well. There's other runes you can pick up, but the physical damage or the iron runes is probably a good way to go on that too. And in terms of other bonuses you might want to look out for, increased attack speed. That's really good, especially for those basic attacks. Gets you to fire those faster. Increased accuracy, that's good. Mana per enemy killed is actually really important on this build, especially as you're starting out, because sustain is going to be brutal if you don't have some type of mana back when you're spamming those lightning arrows and the lightning rods. Yeah, you need some sort of sustain. So mana per enemy killed, even if you don't have it on your weapon, you're going to want that on a few other armor pieces. So that's pretty much it in terms of the basic bow. I don't really worry about elemental damage. That's not as important as physical. So if you do happen to get a bow with extra lightning damage, cold damage, whatever, that's totally fine, but just look for something with physical damage as a priority. Now, going kind of hand in hand with that is your quiver. Remember, quiver is like an additional sort of bonus damage you can add to your attacks. And again, just like the bow, you're going to want a quiver that's going to prioritize physical damage. You have 2 stat lines here for physical damage. A really good one that I think I picked up is the percent increase damage with bow skills. So I'm actually seeing a big increase with that, and you get an increase through your passive skill tree to your quiver stats as well, which we'll look at in just a minute. But yeah, physical damage, increased bow damage, projectile damage, anything like that is what you're going to want to look out for with the quiver. Another very important piece on the Ranger is going to be your boots. That's because you do want something with increased movement speed. Talked about this in a lot of other previous videos. I think you can start with like 10% at the beginning of the game, and this just goes up 15, 20, 25% as you find better boots. Remember to check the vendors every time you level up. There'll be a chance that they have a couple of boots there with movement speed, and obviously you can just upgrade these with whatever stats you can add to them. So mine has max life, max mana, dexterity. That's a pretty good spread of bonuses overall. And then I'll just quickly kind of go over the other pieces that I have. A couple of blue pieces still, no uniques really. So still working on this build, obviously. You can see I have another piece here with gain mana per enemy killed. So this combined with my bow, I have 0 sustain issues at all. So I do think that's really important. Your rings, you can often find rings with bonuses to physical damage as well. So that's good stat to look out for on rings. I did manage to find this chest piece that has spirit. And this is actually really cool. If you can get something with spirit bonuses early on, you can actually upgrade that Herald of Thunder skill that we talked about to give it some more support gems. Otherwise, you'll probably just have 30 spirit from the first campaign if you kill that particular mini-boss. So that's everything I have right now. Obviously, the build's still in progress, and we'll just continue to upgrade and add pieces from here. Okay, from there, we can move into the passive skill tree next and see what I've picked up. I do like the start as a ranger because there's a lot of different areas you can focus on, depending on how you want to structure your build. These little like sub-trees, like more poison damage, for example, or more penetration to lightning resistance, bonuses to your equipped quiver, and so on. So there's lots of little cool areas based off the start as a ranger that you can get into, which we'll talk about here. But first, pretty simple. I think you're going to want to start here on the more damage-focused side of the passive tree and get that projectile damage bonus. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, basically 4 of those up to the next major node, which is increased projectile speed, attack speed, and plus 10 dexterity. That's a really good start to this build. From there, we're continuing along with more projectile damage. We actually get 3 more bonuses there, and then leading up to your first attribute. You can change this depending on your needs for gear or for support gems. And then also occasionally I'll put a couple of extra attributes here. Again, if I need something to run more gems or for a particular piece of gear that I don't have the stats for yet, and then you can always respec those later. But about this point, you can kind of choose to specialize. Do you want more lightning focus, or you want to just keep going with more stats and damage? I went the lightning round, which is going to be up here through dexterity and then into elemental damage. So you can see 8% increased elemental damage, more of that here. Increased chance for ailments, so that's going to affect our shock chance as well, helping us to proc Herald of Thunder more often. And then some very nice little nodes here for shock chance and elemental damage. So I went all the way through here next. You also get penetration through lightning resistance here, which is really good. Again, just amping up all that lightning damage potential that you have, especially against packs on this build, which is really strong. Now, over here, a couple sort of smaller trees that I think are worth checking out is over here for poison damage. So if you like the poison focus, and this can be really strong actually at the beginning of the game against like Act 1 and Act 2 bosses, you can get a lot of good bonuses for your poison arrow. So increased magnitude basically means your dot is stronger, increased duration of that dot. And then over here, stacking toxins gives you +1 poison able to affect enemies at a time. So that's what you can see in some of the boss gameplay. I can hit them with 2 poison arrows and I can stack both effects at the same time for basically double the damage. Though it does reduce the overall damage of each arrow, you're going to get more damage because you're able to stack 2 on the same boss, for example. And then the other thing I would just wait for until you get a really good quiver. I just recently got a good quiver, so I started to go into the quiver tree here. So you can see it's going to basically give you increased effects for all the bonuses on your equipped quiver. So once you get all of these nodes, let's see, 10%, there's 20, I'm at 50, 65, 80. Yeah, so about 80%. So almost like double the effects of your quiver once you completely fill out this tree. So I wouldn't do this right away until you get, a quiver that's actually good. Mine has some good physical damage bonuses. It also has a % increase to all of my bow damage. So as soon as I got that, that's when I started respecking. I actually took away some poison and I started going into the master fletching tree. So that's a really good spot to focus on too. And then further down, we're just getting more damage. So here's kind of interesting. You can specialize in more projectile damage from a distance. So enemies further than 6 meters, you can get 12, 24, almost about 50% bonus damage against enemies which are further than 6 meters. Or you can get the same bonuses for enemies within 2 meters. So this is a really interesting way you can specialize your ranger as well. I mean, if you have enough points, you could do both, which would be kind of nice. Also, one thing you can do if you're really struggling against particular bosses, you can respec these 3 nodes. So for example, there's a boss in the second campaign, the Defiler, I think he's called, which is you're kind of like limited to close range based on the boss's mechanics. So for that particular encounter, the first time I faced him, I actually respec'd these 3 into the 2 meter range, and that boss was incredibly easy. And then I just respec'd back when I was done. So that's something you can think about as well. But as you progress, you're going to get more sort of just raw damage nodes. So up here, attack damage, I'm going to fill out this. And eventually you'll come over here to this unique bow damage tree. It looks like a bow, so it's pretty obvious. You're going to want to specialize into here as well as you progress. But that's going to do it for our basic leveling guide to the Ranger and beginner setup. Hopefully that helped you. And if it did, please do me a favor and crush that like button. It is absolutely appreciated. And it lets YouTube know to share this video with others. As I mentioned, there is a written guide. So if you'd like to see more information about all the skills, support gems, passive skill tree, gear options, and more, that'll be linked down below. Or you can just check out the website. That's hacktheminotaur.com. But as always, thanks for watching. I hope you're doing well. Stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next video.